What's good, world? MIB back with another reaction video. Appreciate y'all. Just getting loaded with the other videos I'm gonna be posting. Appreciate y'all. We're doing a different video today. Today we're doing a video about how the Titanic flew into the water. It didn't float, and why it went into the atmosphere instead of underwater. I don't know, but nah, I'm just playing. We're doing a video because I guess they found out new evidence about how the fucking Titanic sank, why it sank, how it looked when it sank, because I guess the way that they thought it did before was not the case. Let's jump straight into it. I want to make these quick.
How the final hours of the Titanic unfolded. But you might think you know how the final hours of the Titanic unfolded. But new evidence has revealed shocking details that completely rewrite the story. So how did the so-called unsinkable ship end up at the bottom of the North Atlantic? The truth may be far stranger than what you've heard before. From the moment the iceberg tore into the Titanic's starboard hull on April 14, 1912, off the coast of Newfoundland, panic set in. It would take less than 3 hours for the entire ship to be submerged. But this wasn't a bolt from the blue. Over the course of 4 days, Titanic's radio operators Harold Bride and Jack Phillips had received no fewer than 7 iceberg warnings from other ships navigating the same icy waters. But icebergs were an occupational hazard for any voyage out in those waters, and one that the personnel on board had dealt with before.
Right.
But there were other factors at play, ones that the lookouts on that doomed ship never could have seen coming. The last winter had been unseasonably mild. The extra heat caused larger icebergs further north to fracture and split, sending huge, dangerous chunks of ice from the west of Greenland. Conditions in Iceberg Alley would be the worst for seafarers in 50 years, and some of the messages warning about this never reached Edward Smith, the captain of the Titanic. The reason for that is lost to history, but most speculate that it might have been a result of miscommunication.
Because they told the captain to turn and he didn't want to, and he said that's why I said that. It says, "I see nothing but stars and pride."
Titanic. The reason for that is lost to history, but most speculate that it might have been a result of miscommunication or malfunctioning radio equipment. The ship's direction was altered slightly in response to some of the adverse reports that did come through, nudging further south at a rate of 22 knots. But that wasn't enough to get the ship out of the danger zone, and the little mistakes and instances of bad luck across the ship started to pile up, like a lethal floating mountain of ice. Because of the calm waters, the lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, couldn't see any of the water breaking at the base of an approaching berg. And making matters worse, they had to make that call with the naked eye because the crow's nest binoculars were missing. When the iceberg was actually within range, First Officer William Murdoch gave the order to hard a starboard, which would start the process of turning the massive ship to the left. But it was too late. The maneuver only caused the iceberg to scrape along the ship's starboard side instead of hitting head-on. And this was when things really start to get nasty. But to understand why the Titanic sank, you first need to understand why so many believed that it was unsinkable in the first place. Now, new findings from National Geographic
Find out that it wasn't even close to.
are casting fresh light on the disaster. The first shocking surprise is that few of the people actually involved in the building of the Titanic would have ever made the unsinkable claim. Recent historical analysis shows that the claim was less a belief held by the ship's designers and more of a marketing tool used in brochures and write-ups to reassure water-wary passengers. It's a cruel twist of fate that, in all likelihood, we only even associate the term unsinkable with the Titanic because it sank. But the rich passengers boarding the ship did indeed think it was extremely safe, largely due to one extremely advanced, for the time at least, safety feature. The hull was divided into 16 parts, each one with a door in between them that could easily be closed with a switch, compared to the hull being divided into fewer, larger compartments. Why did this make such a difference, in theory? Well, if one compartment in the hull was damaged and started to take on water, the doors could be closed and the leak could be easily quarantined. Therefore, the ship would stay buoyant and the passengers would remain high and dry in the event of an emergency. So, how did we see a ship with a feature like that split in half and kill around 1,500 passengers and crew in the freezing waters below?
Does that even happen?
When the ship hit the iceberg sideways, a large shard of underwater ice slashed through the boat's forecastle, its upper deck. For years, people thought the Titanic was doomed by a huge hole being ripped across its hull, compromising too many compartments to possibly quarantine in one fell swoop. But this is exactly what the new evidence has disproved. As was proposed right after the accident by Edward Wilding, chief naval architect for Harland and Wolff, the strike that felled the Titanic wasn't a continuous blow. It was a deadly series of much smaller holes. For over a century now, this has just been a theory, but the work of Paul K. Mathias and later the Nat Geo team has shown that Wilding's belief, largely discounted at the time, was actually the closest to the truth after all. Each of these holes running in a narrow line across the hull were about the size of 2 sheets of A4 paper. Individually, they seemed small, but together they breached 6 of the ship's 16 watertight compartments in an instant, sending freezing seawater cascading in and dealing a devastating blow to the Titanic's structural integrity. Experts today have theorized that if only 4 of those sections were breached, the ship might have survived. How did they figure this out when so many other researchers and historians had overlooked those details?
But if it hits the black part, which I don't know the name of, how does it affect the red part if that's high above the water?
The answer all comes down to modern computer technology. It was a project spearheaded by filmmaker and massive Titanic enthusiast Anthony Geffen, along with the Magellan Limited Deep Sea Mapping Organization and legions of historians, engineers, and other experts. Now all they needed were the robots. The 2 remote-operated underwater robots, Romeo and Juliet, were sent down to the wreck over a 3-week period to collect as much data as possible from all the remains scattered across the ocean floor. Every inch of the Titanic was scanned in detail. Over 715,000 individual images were captured in 4K, in addition to a huge number of laser measurements. The result was 16 terabytes of usable data, or about the same as 1.5 million MP3 songs or 6 million ebooks. The images were used to create a 3D scan of the entire Titanic wreck in minuscule detail. This created, in the words of National Geographic, a digital twin of the real wreck lurking almost 12,500 feet beneath the waves. According to Titanic researcher Park Stevenson, quote, "It's like a crime scene. You need to see what the evidence is in the context of where it is. And having a comprehensive view of the entirety of the wreck site is the key to understanding what happened here. The big difference is that this crime scene is 9 miles wide. And that's how we got images of the sunken Titanic that historians and researchers of the past could have only dreamed of. On the model, you can see the shattered stern around 2,000 feet away from the rest of the ship, a side effect of the ship splitting in half and shattering against the seafloor. In the seabed around the ship, you can even see the personal items of long-dead passengers, like watches, jewelry, and coins. Panic and chaos reigned when it became clear what was happening on the ship. Naturally, the crew did what they could to keep the rowdy passengers under control, with some reports even...
And if you don't know, the bodies ain't there and all that, most of the stuff ain't there because it dissolves in water after a long time. Obviously, just for the people in the back.
Claiming that they fired off guns into the air to pacify the crowd. They needed to get as many people onto the lifeboats as possible.
This is fun. Huh, getting in the pool. It's a weird move.
That's a weird move.
Sadly, that wasn't going to happen. The Titanic lifeboats were large, each one capable of carrying around 65 people, but due to the commotion, the first lifeboat sent off had only 28 people in it, less than half of the people who could have potentially been saved on that one boat. That set a grim trend going forward that showed no signs of stopping. In an effort to control the crush of people, some of those boats had only a fraction of the people they could have had. Families were split, with the women and children first law of the sea, meaning that a large number of husbands and fathers needed to stay behind. And while it's easy to point to the mishandling of the evacuation as the reason why so many people died, even in the best of circumstances, a huge number of people would have been doomed. In an incredible act of overconfidence in the safety features of the Titanic, there were around 1,200 lifeboat places for over 2,200 passengers. Over 1,000 people would have been impossible to save no matter what. When the hull buckled and broke, the Titanic started taking on thousands of tons of water at a rapid rate, filling up compartments. This caused a massive internal imbalance on an already structurally damaged ship. The infamous split that caused the Titanic to fold as it sank occurred between the ship's third and fourth funnels, right beneath the ship's smokestacks.
That's why there's only one
This
over
area
there.
was practically doomed from the start, given that the part of the hull here was less reinforced to accommodate the weight of the funnels. Only 706 passengers survived the sinking of the Titanic, and many of their lives were ruined, having left family members or friends on the ship to die.
They could have saved 1,200.
RMS Carpathia arrived on the scene.
If everything went right, they could have saved 1,200 and 2,000 might have died, but they didn't even get it right. So only 700 lived and almost 3,000 died.
They were looking at the site of one of the great...
I should have put on, but whatever. 1,500 people? How? Whatever. And the lifeboats could have saved it. Yeah, this is where the map starts getting all fucked up. Hold on, let me see if we get a little image. I'm sure this is almost exactly what it looked like. I'm sure. Alright, let's go right here.
Greatest tragedies of the early 20th century, and it's been up to everyone else in the decades since.
1,500.
When closely observing photos taken of the hub fragments by Romeo and Juliet, the researchers were able to easily dispel the idea that the ship splitting in two was a clean break. In fact, from the damage on the edges of the fragments, it seemed more like it had been violently torn apart during the wreck. One of the other stories that has long circulated about the sinking of the Titanic is what happened to First Officer William Murdoch, the same crew member who had made the diversion order just a little too late. It often been repeated as a fact that Murdoch abandoned his post when things descended into chaos. But material evidence from the new scan shows us that this isn't actually the case. The positioning of the davit, the crane used for lowering lifeboats into the water, suggests that Murdoch wasn't in the lifeboat being lowered, but still on board, helping to lower the lifeboat with his crew. He was likely in this position when a wave swept him away to the murky depths of the Atlantic forever. Another one of the long-disputed claims from survivors was that of ice pouring into the actual rooms of the ship while people tried to escape. This was long thought to be an exaggeration to make the stories of escape more exciting. The discovery of a shattered porthole, likely smashed by the iceberg, suggests that eyewitnesses may have been right all along, but these pale in comparison to the most amazing detail that the new evidence has proved. As the situation completely degraded and the panicking hordes on the ship tried desperately to get into the handful of remaining lifeboats,
this is real.
You can imagine that there was a time of selfishness and struggle. Everyone on board wanted those boats, and they would do anything to get on them, even knowing that it would condemn others to certain doom in the freezing deep. But that wasn't quite true. In fact, amongst all of the other things discovered by the Nat Geo 3D model of the ship, the researchers discovered an extraordinary moment of true courage and heroism. For decades, some witnesses and survivors of the wreck had claimed that there were lights on the ship all the way up to the moment it sank. Many thought that was impossible. Surely they just remembered incorrectly while in a state of pure panic. For that to be true, Joseph Bell, the chief engineer, and his team would have had to stay in the boiler room, shoveling coal into the furnace to keep the engines going even when they knew they were going to die. It seemed so improbable until the latest 3D model showed an open steam valve. These valves open up when steam from the boiler is passing through, generating electricity in the process.
Wow.
And those lights being on would be the only thing letting the passengers see well enough to launch lifeboats. Adding further credence to this, the boilers in the Titanic were concave, meaning hot metal contracted quickly when exposed to extremely cold water. This suggests that the boilers were still hot when the water rushed in. Joseph Bell and his team of engineers remained in the boiler room, knowing that doing so, they were going to die, and in the process allowing so many others to live. It's a poignant example of the power of the human spirit, and how selflessness and compassion can still win out, even in the most doomed of situations. But Titanic isn't the only vessel lost to the depths of the Atlantic. Watch Coast Guard finally reveals...
No, we're not gonna watch that.
Wherever you
Go
go,
back.
it's wherever you go.
That was a crazy video. Honestly, I'm a huge history fan. That was a dope video. Great to see that we just never give up on learning and finding evidence. And even if it's still saying, we're still gonna keep looking. Y'all let me know how you feel about videos like these. Again, I'm gonna clip it up anyway, so y'all only gonna see the clips. But appreciate you guys. And one day, I'll have some people that watch all my videos all the way to the end, and then they will see this, and then we won't have to worry about that. Appreciate you. Let's jump straight out of this. Jump into the next one. Appreciate y'all. Sheesh.